Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to be going through the steps 4 and 5 of the 5-step process. So at this point, we've gone through, and again, as I've said in the other videos, make sure you're watching these videos in the right order. You want to make sure you've done the overview of the 5-step process for revenue recognition, packet first, then do the steps, the detail of the steps sequentially. So start with step 1 and steps 1 and 2, then do step 3, and then do steps 4 and 5. Okay, there's packets for each one of those. Okay, so now we're just going to go through steps 4 and 5, and then we'll be done with our detailed look at the 5-step process for revenue recognition. So step 4 is allocate the transaction price to the separate performance obligations. If more than one performance obligation exists in a contract, a company must allocate the total contract price to the separate performance obligations. Companies must allocate the transaction price using the fair values of the separate performance obligations, okay? So we're just trying to allocate the transaction price. And so we have 4 methods to allocate the transaction price, okay, to these separate obligations. These are our 4 potential, basically, these are our 4 options, okay? Now, some of these are better than others, and we'll kind of point that out as we go. So the best measure is the standalone selling price, the price the product is sold for when it is sold by itself. This is the best measure of fair value. We're trying to allocate the transaction price using the fair value of these separate performance obligations. The standalone selling price is clearly the best measure, right? Because that's basically what the product sells for by itself, right? Okay, if we can't get that, we can use other things such as the adjusted market assessment approach, where the company kind of looks at the market to determine the fair value of the product. We could also do expected cost plus a margin approach, where the company estimates the cost it incurs to produce the product, and then they add like a markup or a margin to it. Then we have the residual approach, where a company uses the other fair values it can determine and subtracts the fair values from the total contract price. Okay, so let's say you had like 3 products, right? If you can estimate 2 of them, then you could say, okay, if the total contract price was like 100 and you know the other 2 were like $70 total price, then using the residual approach, the last one would be $30. Okay, this is probably like the least. This is probably like the worst way of doing it, but if that's all the information you can get, that's all you can get, right? You kind of just have to work with what you have, right? And you would like to get standalone selling price, and if not, maybe one of these middle 2 measures, but if you have to use residual, you have to use residual. There's nothing you can do, okay? And again, for our problems, we're not necessarily worried about which one's the best. I mean, it's good to know. Obviously, you should know that, but, for our problems, we're kind of just making sure we know how to actually work these mathematically. That's basically the main focus, okay? Then step 5, recognize revenue as each performance obligation is satisfied. Once the customer obtains control of the good or service, the company may recognize revenue. The customer has control when it can obtain all benefits of using the product and prevent others from obtaining benefits from using the product. A company may recognize revenue at one point in time over a period in time. Generally, revenue is recognized at a single point in time. However, revenue must be recognized over time if a company meets any one of the following 3 criteria. And again, this is a copy and paste from the codification. If you watch the videos on the construction and process KIP account stuff, these are literally the exact same criteria. And when we go through these long-term construction contracts, we have a lot of videos and packets on that specific topic because it's very extensive. This is when we use that, is when we have these long-term construction contracts, okay? So when we meet any of these criteria, we recognize revenue over time as opposed to at a single point in time. The customer simultaneously receives and consumes the benefits of the seller's performance as the seller performs. The entity's performance creates or enhances an asset, for example, work in process, that the customer controls as the asset is enhanced or created. And then the entity's performance does not create an asset with an alternative use to the entity, and the entity has an enforceable right to payment for the performance completed to date. Okay, so basically if you meet any of these, you recognize revenue over time. Okay, so let's just go ahead. That was a quick introduction. I'll just go ahead and jump into some problems here. The first one's pretty long. The second one is not too bad if I can remember correctly. I guess there's 2 quick ones on step 5. We have 1 long one on step 4, and then we have 2 quick problems on step 5. Okay, let's just make sure this all is showing. All right, perfect. Step 4 problem, XYZ. And again, there's a lot here, but it's not too bad. This is, a lot of the work is right here. We only have a couple other journal entries on the second page. Okay, XYZ company installs workout equipment in customers' homes. Additionally, the company offers training services to help customers learn how to use the equipment. On December 1, 2017, the company installed an elliptical machine, a bench press, and a leg press in Bill's house. Additionally, Bill purchased XYZ's training services to help him learn to use the equipment over the next 3 months. The total contract price was $5 million. Okay, 5,000 for the elliptical, the bench press, the leg press, and also training services. Okay, and installation. Okay, so we have all those things bundled together in the $5,000 contract price. Okay, so we have to keep that in mind. So the elliptical has a standalone selling price of $3,000, cost of $1,000. Bench press has a standalone selling price of $500, cost of $350. And the leg press does not have a standalone selling price. However, the company was able to determine the leg press cost the company $200 and to make, and it used a 20% markup on all its products. So this one, we're going to use the cost plus the markup, okay? And we're going to have to determine how much that is in a minute. Okay, we already know that because it's just telling us the cost and the markup, right? So like cost plus a margin approach just makes sense there. It's really the only one we can use. Additionally, the average market price for the training services is $1,000, and the price of installation service cannot be determined because the company has not installed this specific set of equipment together. Prepare the journal entries for XYZ for December 31 of 2017, which is when they install it. December 1 of 2017, January 31 of 2018, February 28th of 2018. There's just a lot going on here, right? So, all right. So let's just go ahead and we need to determine first how much of the total contract price we're going to allocate to each one of these products. Okay. So in order to do that, we need to determine, okay, what approach we're using, right? So we have all these different approaches. We have standalone selling price, adjusted market, where we use the market, expected cost plus a margin, and then residual, where it's just the leftover. Okay, well, the first two things, the elliptical machine and the bench press, both tell us the standalone selling prices of $3,000 and then $500. Okay, so the approach we're using for the elliptical and the bench press is standalone selling price because it just straight up gives us those amounts, right? It says, this is how much these things normally sell for. $3,000 and then $500. Okay, then we have the leg press. Okay, the next thing is the leg press. Okay, it says they can't determine the standalone selling price. However, they normally, it costs them $200 to make, and then they use a 20% markup on its products. Okay, so in that case, we're going to use the cost plus a margin. Okay, so we'll take $200. We'll multiply it by basically 1.2, right? Because we're marking it up by 20%. That gives us $240 as the amount of the contract price that we're going to allocate to the leg press. Okay? Then it says for the training services that the average market price is $1,000, and that's all the information that we're given. And so in that case, we're going to use the adjusted market approach where we're looking to the market to determine the fair value. And then finally, we don't have any information about the installation services. So we're going to have to use the residual approach. Okay, so the way we use the residual approach is that we'll add up all of these, okay, and then we'll subtract that amount away from the total contract price of $5,000. Okay, so if we add up $3,000 plus $500 plus $240 plus $1,000, we end up with $4,740. And then if we do the math, we get $260 as the residual, right? That's just the amount that's left over from the standpoint of once we've taken out all these other products and performance obligations, right? Then at that point, we're good to go and we have $260. Okay, so now we've allocated out the transaction price to all these five. It's basically 5 separate performance obligations in this specific case, okay, because of the way the problem is worded, okay, we basically have 5 separate performance obligations, and we've allocated them all out, okay? Now, on December 1, now we just have to make the journal entries. The journal entries aren't that bad once you've done this part. Okay, so December 1, the first thing we need to do is record revenue, right, because we're getting revenue. So we receive cash of $5,000, right, because the total contract price is $5,000. Then we have to divide up the cash received into revenue versus unearned revenue. Why do we have unearned revenue? Well, we have these training services. What does it tell us about the training services? It says, Bill purchased XYZ's training services to help him learn to use the equipment over the next 3 months. Okay, and so what's going to happen is that for these training services, XYZ is going to recognize revenue over the next 3 months for the training services. Okay, the training services are right here. It's $1,000 for the training services overall, right? So that means that as of the date of the contract being signed, XYZ still has to train Bill on using this equipment. So they can't recognize revenue initially. They have to recognize revenue over time, basically on a straight line basis, because they're going to earn the revenue evenly. That's basically the way we're just going to make that assumption in this problem, and that's generally the way it's done in these problems, okay? If you have unearned service revenue or sales revenue or whatever, generally you just earn it on an even basis over time, okay? So again, we have $5,000 of cash. Service revenue is $260. Where's that coming from? Well, that's the installation services. Okay, that's a service, right, to actually install it. And by December 1, we've installed the equipment, so that means that we earn that revenue on that date. And then again, the unearned service revenue is $1,000 for the training services that XYZ hasn't performed. They'll earn that later. Then sales revenue of $3,740. That is the additional 3 products of the elliptical, bench press, and leg press that we actually let's sell it. That's sales revenue because we've sold that and we've installed it already. So we earn the revenue by December 1st. Then we just record the cost of goods sold. Again, it tells us the cost of goods sold is $1,000 for the elliptical. The bench press is $350, and then the cost of the leg press was $200. So we add those all up. Cost of goods sold, inventory for $1,550. Okay. And then we want to record the revenue for the training services. This should be $1,000, which is going to change our calculation to $333. So each one of these should say $333. Excuse the typo. $333. I got a little confused on the different revenues, but these should all be $333. Okay. So again, we have $1,000 of revenue for these training services. Okay. So what we're going to do is each month we're going to recognize revenue, right? We're going to recognize 1 month of revenue because it's for 3 months. So we take $1,000, we divide by 3. It's basically 333.33 cents, right? Okay. So we recognize basically $333 a month. Okay. And so what we have to do is we have to debit unearned service revenue for $333, credit service revenue for $333. And we do that every single month until it's over, right? So the first month would be December because, again, these products were purchased on December 1st. So that means we'd have 1 month passing by the end of December, another month passing by the end of January, another month passing by the end of February. Again, we're just doing this on a straight line basis. And so what we're doing is we're just moving the unearned service revenue into the revenue account to recognize the revenue. Okay, so that's the end of the step 4 problem. Now we just have a quick step 5 problem that we are going to go through, and then we'll be done with this topic. Okay, so step 5 problem: ABC company operates in the grocery business. On January 1st of 2018, ABC sold a bottle of soda to Jim for $2. Determine when ABC can recognize the revenue related to this transaction. Well, on January 1st, because this is when the performance obligation is satisfied. Again, once the customer controls the product and they can use it for their own purposes, we recognize the revenue. And this would be a situation where we recognize the revenue at a specific point in time because, again, we do not meet these criteria at the bottom here to recognize revenue over time. Okay? Then the second example, XYZ company constructs apartment buildings. On January 1st of 2017, the company signed a contract to construct an apartment building that was completed December 31 of 2018. The company uses the cost-to-cost basis to track its progress to the contract. This we'll learn a little bit later. That's in the videos on the construction and process, the long-term contracts account, what that means. We're not too worried about that. But basically, right now, we need to determine when they can recognize revenue. They're going to recognize revenue as the contract goes on, as time expires, because the company meets the criteria for recognizing revenue over time. Okay, basically, because of the fact that they're performing this over a long period of time and the customer is, basically these criteria are met. Okay, basically these criteria right here are met, and so we're going to recognize revenue over time. Okay, what happens with these construction contracts is that over time, these companies are making these buildings, or they're creating something that's kind of like a big asset, and they're going to give it to someone else. Like it's basically a project, right? You're constructing an apartment building. And so, generally speaking, as long as they meet some of those criteria, which in this problem they do, it'll make more sense once we watch the videos on the construction project videos. Then they can recognize revenue over time. Okay, and so again, if they meet any of these criteria, which in this case they do, they recognize revenue over time. So that is the end of this topic, and I hope that was helpful.